Saya meyakini bahwa ASEAN masih penting dan relevan bagi rakyat, bagi kawasan, dan bagi dunia. Bahwa ASEAN akan terus berkontribusi bagi perdamaian dan stabilitas di Indo-Pasifik. Bahwa ASEAN akan terus dapat menjaga pertumbuhan ekonomi dan ASEAN Matters epicentrum of growth. Secara resmi saya nyatakan kick off Keketuaan ASEAN Indonesia 2023 dimulai.
Welcome to the Trade Policy Advisory Group discussion, or Trade-PAG, with the theme, ASEAN Chairmanship, Formulating Priorities for ASEAN Deliverables. My name is Hasna Fairuz from the Secretariat of Trade Policy Agency of the Ministry of Trade of Indonesia, and it's my pleasure to be your MC for today's event. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to the Honorable Head of Trade Policy Agency of the Ministry of Trade of Indonesia, Bapak Kasan, Lead Advisor ERIA, Ibu Lili Yan Ing, our speaker, Brian A. Wong, Managing Director of Seacliff Partners Limited and a former Vice President of Alibaba Group. Our panelist, Ihwan Mahmur Nasution, Head of Center of International Affairs for the Ministry of Communication and Informatics of Indonesia. Maria Monica Wiharja, Economist and Visiting Fellow at Institute for Southeast Asian Studies, Yusof Ishak Institute. Our moderator, Dr. Aladin Derilo, Senior Economic Advisor for ERIA, and a former Deputy Secretary General for ASEAN Economic Community. Our contributors, Dr. Widya Stutik and Aisha Rahbini, PhD. Expert staffs, Senior Advisor, Director Generals, leaders from the Ministry of Trade and other invited ministries. Last but not least, all offline and online participants. Ladies and gentlemen, the Trade Policy Agent Advisory Group, or Trade-PAG, is a collaborative activity between the Trade Policy Agency of the Ministry of Trade of Indonesia with the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, or ERIA, and the International Trade Analysis and Policy Studies of the Bogor Agricultural Institute, or ITAPS IPB, which aims to produce recommendations to the Minister of Trade by conducting a discussion forum with key experts. This event will take place in English language, conducted hybrid using Zoom conference, and will record the event to be published in the Trade Policy Agency's YouTube channel. Before proceeding to the main event, allow me to kindly invite the Head of Trade Policy Agency to deliver his opening remarks. Please welcome Bapak Kasan.
Ya, terima kasih. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning to all of you and distinguished Ibu Lili, Lead Advisor of ERIA, and also Bu Widyastuti from ITAPS. We together event organizer of this forum, and also thanks to speaker Mr. Brian Wong, former Vice President Alibaba Group and Managing Director Split Partners Limited. Thank you for your time and for your coming to Jakarta. And also the two panelists we have Pak Iwan Makmur Nasution, Head of Center of International Affairs from the Ministry of Communication and Informatik Republik Indonesia. Terima kasih Pak Iwan. And also our all college Ibu Maria Monica Wiharja, Economist and Visiting Fellow ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute from Singapore. Moderator, special moderator, Mr. Aladin Derilo. Thank you, Pak Aladin. He is a senior economic advisor for ERIA also and former Deputy Secretary General for ASEAN Economic Community. Also, thanks to all participants from Indonesia, maybe from the ministry or the institute in Indonesia, and also the think tank, and our participant from Policy Research Analysis ASEAN Program, and all participants. Before we move to presentation and discussion, presentation will be provided by Mr. Brian Wong and also the two panelists. I want to inform that this Trade-PAG or Trade Policy Advisory Group is a meeting forum discussions with a key expert that is organized together by three institutions that I already mentioned before. That is a Trade Policy Agency of the Ministry of Trade, where I chair this agency, and also ERIA led by Ibu Lili, and ITAPS Institute Pertanian Bogor or Bogor Agriculture University led by Dr. Widyastuti. And today event is the sixth time that we have been held this event. So we have 4 events last year, and then this is the second event in this year. And just last week we have implemented a discussion regarding the multilateral trade. This is about WTO reform, and we know we have discussion about the regional cooperations, or this is the ASEAN. And as you have seen on the video last 2 minutes, the President of Republic Indonesia, I think the launching or kick off the ASEAN Chairmanship by Indonesia from the street of Tamrin, center of Jakarta, on the street, kick off on the street in the morning. This is a very special event although me and also our minister at the time there is no there because our minister have also the event at the same time. But we have seen this is very important from the president viewpoints. So Indonesia chairmanship in ASEAN this year, also we have established three main agenda. First is about recovery and rebuilding. Second, about digital economy. And I think why this today, we invite Mr. Brian Wong to provide his views on these issues. And the last is about sustainability, with 16 priority economic deliverables for handling multidimensional crisis. Especially for these issues about digital economy is very strategic because digitalization has rapidly become the key to economic development and is believed to be one of the strategies to get out of this crisis. But one of Indonesia's challenges is accelerating the transformation and participation of inclusive digital economy amid the uneven digital infrastructure across the regions. I think for these issues, our panelists, Pak Iwan, very for these issues, yeah, because the Ministry of Communication and Informatics is responsible for this infrastructure and others. Through this Trade-PAG forum, we expect input and views from the experts and also from the panelists, and also we have the contributors and also the participants to map challenges, obstacles, and solutions in increasing Indonesia participation in the digital economy and creating digital equality. Yesterday, in breakfast meeting, I accompanied by I invited by Pak Dino Patijala, and I attend with our minister. Some participant mentioned is about the new new terminology. He said we are not discuss about Internet of Things, but we have to discuss about Internet of anything. This is very surprise for me because he said very confident, and he said we don't have to discuss about Internet of Things, but we have to discuss Internet of anything. So I think this is also the new terminology that related to these issues. And last, I would like to thank also to expert, moderator, contributor, and especially to Ibu Lili from AREA and her team. I know her team also from AREA and also the new member, yeah, team from Ministry of Trade. Ibu Yesi, I think maybe here, yeah. Yesterday already come to my room to inform to me that since Monday, she works with Ibu Lili in AREA for 1 year or 2 years. 1 year, yeah, 1 year. Will be extend maybe to be 2 years, yeah. And also Ibu Widya Stuti and Bu Esa from ITAPS Bogor Agriculture University and her team also. So our partner, two ladies, Ibu Lili from ERIA, Ibu Widyastuti from ITAPS, and Ibu Esa. And mostly participants sitting in the front is ladies. Yeah. Thank you for ladies. Yeah, special for ladies, not only our partner, participant, panelists, and also the special thanks to all of you. And the last but not least, I hope that this today discussion can provide benefit for Indonesia development, particularly in formulating policy strategy that can be implemented to support the success of ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreement. And also this is the issues to accelerate the transformation of inclusive digital economy. I still remember this ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreement. When I attended the meeting chaired by Minister of Economic Coordinator Pak Airlangga and the Minister of Foreign Affairs Ibu Retno. On behalf of the Ministry of Trade at that time, I proposed this deliverable from many people in this ministry is not agreed to propose as a one of developer in ASEAN for this chairmanship in this year. This meeting last year. I still remember this is decision made by Pak Airlangga and support by Ibu Retno. Indonesia next year, I mean this year, should be proposed. This agreement should be concluded this year. This is moment when I attended that meeting, and I think this is very hard to conclude. But today event, maybe we can have the views, the perspective or contribution for all participants here to make sure that this deliverable about ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreement can be concluded in this Indonesia chairmanship for this year. This is the target from Indonesian government. I know that this issue is very important, yeah, and also our colleagues from the Ministry of Trade and also special from Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also the Ministry of Communication and Informatic, because at the time representative from Ministry of Communication, Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Foreign Affairs support for this deliverable. So this is just to add the addition information from me. Thank you for you all, and also a special thank to Ibu Lili and Bu Wid. This is the second time for this year of our event. Terima kasih semuanya. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Bapak Kasan, for the opening remarks. The second remarks will be delivered by Area Lead Advisor. Please welcome Ibu Lili Yan Ing.
Thank you, Bapak Kasan Muri, Bapak Ihwan, distinguished speakers, chair, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my respected colleague, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good morning to all of you. I don't mean to promote my book, even though I always do, but if you have a time, you can scan the QR code. This is a free access book. While Brian can sold 2 million copies of his book, I can only sold 2 copies. One is my eldest daughter, the second one is my youngest one. So I provide for free. When I start this book, the first statement that I made is that this book was written and edited by humans. Because soon, books, reports, goods, services will be produced, operated, delivered by robots, automatic machines, digitalized machine, and AI. We as humans will be living symbiosis with those technologies, advances, innovations, right? So for me and for all of us, digital transformations is the most advanced innovations in our generations that will gonna change not only the way we work, but also the way we live. And soon, whether you believe me or not, it's gonna change the whole social and economic order, okay? Since today we are discussing with trade, let's focus on digital trade. Digital trade at global level, global digital trade has increased from $1 trillion in 2010. It is estimated to reach $10 trillion by 2030. $10 trillion by 2030. Let me highlight 2 things in the context of Southeast Asia or ASEAN. One is opportunities. From the $10 trillion by 2030, 10% or $1 trillion will be contributed by Southeast Asia. 10% or 1 trillion will be contributed by Southeast Asia, okay? Southeast Asia or ASEAN is a vibrant economy with 700 million populations. 440 millions are internet user, whether they are using PC or mobile phone. 440 million. And 80% of 440 million populations have been made at least one online purchase in 2021. 80 out of 440 millions. It's a huge number. And I am the one of the 20% that are not using online purchase. Okay? Not only because I'm old, but also I have issues. That's coming to my second point, challenges of digital trade in ASEAN. The challenges that I think will be a homework for us is that 1, privacy issue, 2nd, cybersecurity, 3rd, unfair competitions, 4th is digital divide. So from our discussions today, I hope we can not only learn from experts that we have today, Pak Ihwan, Brian, Monica, Jessica, Dr. Ha. I'm also expecting we're gonna learn from our discussions and your insights. So we're really looking forward to have your insights to come up with solutions on the challenges that we're facing, as well as our contributions for Indonesia chairmanships in terms of having one of the deliverables of ASEAN's digital economic frameworks this year. And with that, I would like to thank for you for all your participations, and we wish fruitful discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Lili, for the remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, Now we have come to our main agenda, which is the discussion session. All presentation and discussions will be moderated by our chair, Dr. Aladin Derilo. Allow me to read his short bio. Dr. Aladin Derilo is currently a senior economic advisor for the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, or AREA. Prior to that, he worked at the ASEAN Secretariat for many years, where he served in various positions, the latest as the Deputy Secretary General for the ASEAN Economic Community from 2018 until 2021, during which he provided the overall leadership in the implementation of the AEC Blueprint 2025 and ASEAN's Economic Integration Agenda. He also held positions at the Asian Development Bank Institute in Tokyo as senior economist and PricewaterhouseCoopers in Toronto as senior manager transfer pricing. Dr. Willow has written and published extensively on the ASEAN economy and on the broader economic, trade, and financial integration issues. He holds PhD and MA degrees in economics from the University of Hawaii and a BA in economics from the Ateneo de Manila University in the Philippines. So without further ado, please welcome our moderator, Dr. Willow.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning, and thank you for a very kind introduction. I'm very glad to be here and to help moderate this exciting session focusing on ASEAN digital economy, particularly looking at within the context of Indonesian ASEAN Chairmanship. I think it is a very good topic, as a deliverable for this year. I've been working, or I've been with the ASEAN Secretariat, I think, for 16 years, a long time. And I think this issue of digital transformation and connectivity, I feel this is a very timely and appropriate topic. I think, as you know, one important strategy for ASEAN at the moment in terms of the post-pandemic recovery is how to accelerate digital transformation in ASEAN. And I think it makes sense because if you look at what happened during the pandemic, the use of digital technologies, whether we're talking about online shopping or remote working, or even using technologies to accelerate vaccine discovery, I think those technologies have actually enabled countries in ASEAN to reach new markets, and at the same time unleash productivity improvements in the way, as Lili mentioned, businesses and consumers interacted with each other. Interestingly, in 2020, if you look at the growth of e-commerce in Indonesia, it's been the fastest in the region. I think the growth was around 60%, even outpacing most countries in the world. So what does it mean? I think, to be sure, it simply means that digital connectivity has actually become an important lifeline during this pandemic. And moving forward, I feel that the use of digital technologies will continue to be, or even the benefits of digital technologies need to be captured as well when we talk about the future of ASEAN region, okay? Even though digitalization has been high in ASEAN agenda in recent years, I think there's still an urgent need, the way you see it, to accelerate digital transformation and to ensure that the benefits or the long-term impact of digitalization are here to stay, right? Particularly when we talk about the post-pandemic era. But despite that evidence, I think the reality is that achieving digital transformation in ASEAN, or even across countries in the region, like in Indonesia, can be very challenging. I think for me, because of two reasons. One is because of the complexity of digital transformation itself, right? For one, there is a question of, for example, how ASEAN is able to develop the strategies that would really allow the region to reach that transformation level, and how those different strategies can be implemented effectively. I think that's, for me, is a very important issue, because if you look at ASEAN, there's a lot of initiatives right now, but I think implementation is an issue there. I think another question here is to what extent country-specific conditions can actually impact on the transformation, okay, of the region. And here I'm talking about the use of policies and strategies, to what extent they are being implemented by each individual country. I think the way I see it, these are two important questions that hopefully we can discuss in this session. And I'm very happy that we have with me experts who can really help us navigate through the various issues related to digital economy in ASEAN. So without further ado, I would like to start with our main speaker for this morning, Mr. Brian Wong, who is currently the Managing Director of Seacliff Partners Limited. And before that, Brian had a very stellar career at Alibaba Group, okay, for 16 years, holding many positions, including as Special Assistant to the Chairman Jack Ma, also being the Executive Director of Alibaba Global Leadership Academy and a founder of Alibaba Global Initiatives. Brian is also a fellow of the Aspen Institute, was also recognized by World Economic Forum as a young global leader, and also a member of the Committee of 100. He got his bachelor's degree from very good Swarthmore College, and his MBA degree from University of Pennsylvania Wharton School. So without further ado, let's welcome Brian Wong to talk about ASEAN digital economy perspectives for consideration. Brian, please.
Thank you again for that kind introduction, Dr. Rilo, and thank you, Dr. Kasan, for hosting such a wonderful event. Thank you, Dr. Lili. It's an honor to be with distinguished guests, Dr. Waharja and others. Yeah, it's a great honor to be back here for such an important discussion here in Jakarta. It's been about 4 years, actually, since I've been to the city here, and to see the changes that have taken place in such a short time are quite amazing. I always looked at Southeast Asia with great curiosity and anticipation. And as Dr. Lili mentioned, you know, robots and AI have arrived, and I'm glad we're still here to talk about issues for now. Pretty soon it'll be a bunch of AI robots talking to one another, maybe coming up with better ideas. But for now, we're going to embrace this moment and make the most of it. But, you know, on a more serious note, you know, I feel that the group here has probably discussed many issues related to ASEAN trade and particularly digital transformation at length. So I do not claim to be an expert by any regard. I'm a practitioner. And today what I'd like to do is maybe share a perspective that can be used as a comparison to gain some insights on how other regions have gone through their digital transformation, but also, you know, what are the principles to keep in mind. I imagine that this effort is a complex one for many reasons, which we'll get into, but it's nevertheless a very important one. And that's why I'm very happy to be part of this conversation. So I'm going to use a visual aid here just to kind of guide us through this conversation. And I'll speak to the different points. You know, for myself, growing up in Silicon Valley during the start of the internet and then spending almost 2 decades in China during what I think was probably the most exciting time of its digital transformation. I think those perspectives are going to be useful in looking at what's happening now in ASEAN, which I think most people would agree is probably the most exciting space for digital transformation. And as Dr. Kasan mentioned in his opening remarks, he still remembers the moment where the ASEAN Framework Agreement was ASEAN Framework Agreement was signed. And back in 2000, there were only 3.7 internet users, million, not 3.7, 3.7 million internet users in the region at that time. For China, it was also a similar moment. There were probably about 8 million internet users in 1999. The per capita income was $800. And we can see just through the evolution of the technology and the markets that things have changed drastically 20 years later, where through a number of initiatives and efforts through ASEAN, now there are over 460 million internet users, and many of the things that all of our previous speakers mentioned, particularly in terms of the market size, looking at the size of the internet economy, close to 200 billion, I think, at the end of 2022, anticipating by 2025, 360 billion, and as Dr. Lili mentioned, 1 trillion by 2030. So clearly the trajectory is very encouraging and positive, and the efforts have paid off. And there are a lot of positive factors that will continue to encourage people to believe that this market is very attractive. That being that ASEAN, as you all know, is in aggregate the 5th largest economy in the world. Its population is not insignificant when you combine all of the member countries, and it's got a relatively young demographic. If you compare it to China, the median age is about 37 and aging drastically and quickly. It's going through a transformation of its own, of an aging population, and one where labor is going to become much more expensive. So that presents an opportunity actually for Southeast Asia with its young population to serve the needs of markets that are increasing demand of the products that are from Southeast Asia. But the United States is also 38 years old in its median age. So that's a relative advantage. I would also say that the existing social needs represent an opportunity. When we talk about a new era, we talk about an era that's not just being heavily influenced by technology, but when we talk about digital transformation, I would argue that what was once viewed as a disadvantage, that being an emerging market without developed retail infrastructure or a complex financial system, those things traditionally would have been looked at as a disadvantage for markets trying to embrace new growth. But based on experiences that I've seen in places like China, actually being an emerging market presents an opportunity to leapfrog. And so I think that ASEAN should really take this as a great opportunity before it to not look at the negatives, but look at the positives and say, how do we rebuild something, or how do we build something from scratch that will be more shaped for the future and not the past? And so having unbanked or underbanked populations is absolutely a challenge, but that's where digital finance comes into play. Urban and rural divide is definitely a challenge, but it also presents opportunities on how to harness rural labor and resources. And then this large informal economy and the preponderance of SMEs. In Indonesia, I believe the number of the employment numbers, SMEs provide probably 96, 97% of all jobs. And in the Philippines, it's 99%. That's traditionally been looked at as a challenge in terms of how to manage and how to actually engage that workforce. But this informal economy is now becoming part of the digital economy thanks to much of the technology. So this is an opportunity for growth. There is already a critical mass of internet users in ASEAN, as we talked about, with 460 million internet users, over 80% that use it for e-commerce already. That shows that there's momentum in the market and large potential to grow the spend and contributions of that population. They're also very engaged through smartphones, and thanks to the cost reduction in the production of these smartphones, now everyone has a computer in the palm of their hand and can do work from anywhere. And then finally, the embrace of digital payments through payment systems, through mobile devices and digital finance, I think is not insignificant because of all of the resources that unlocks and access to financial support for people in all levels of the population. The term inclusive is being used frequently in this conversation, and this is where we are really able to finally take the technology and apply it to everyone. And then finally, the great thing, the present company particularly, is the government support that is now really focused on promoting the digital economy. And this is not just in the local economies with each country in ASEAN, but globally, you see an increase in engagement, particularly amongst two countries, the United States and China. China and its agreements with ASEAN are intended to strengthen connectivity and collaboration across a number of different areas, but so is the United States. And we can talk about how this can be used as an advantage for ASEAN as they move forward with their own objectives. Of course, there are impediments. I don't need to go through these in detail because I think you are all more familiar with these than I am, but there are limitations around digital and physical infrastructure, which is critical for connectivity. There's a regulatory issue. There's also affordability of services. If you cannot afford internet access, then you're leaving out a large population. Literacy and digital literacy and skills are going to be investments in the future. And then as Dr. Lee talked about, this trust and data security. If you don't trust them with your data, you're not going to give them your data. So those are the challenges. So what I'm going to do next here is really go through with you a comparison of China's digital economy. And I hope you will bear with me. I'm not going to go through every single one of these images here, but I will talk about it in the context of what created an enabling environment for China in its development, and then use that as a point to reflect on what ASEAN can think about. First and foremost, if we look at what I call the external layer, was the population and market size. This, as we know, provided cheap labor for manufacturing, which allowed China to drive its export-oriented economy, and then now has become the largest middle class in the world. That is the second largest, economy in the world. 1.4 billion people is not insignificant, but it's how you utilize that resource. And as a comparison, obviously, ASEAN with almost 700 million has comparable leverage if it can interlink all these populations. Social stability is very important. This is what has allowed China to develop uninterrupted for 40 years and laid the groundwork for its digital economy. It started with the creation of its manufacturing base, and as we'll talk about later as well, its physical infrastructure, but also the political stability really created confidence in the investors and the entrepreneurs to make the commitments to the market. And I think that when we look around Southeast Asia, you can see where the fruits of that effort, when there are stable governments, you are able to attract more effectively that sort of investment and resource. The physical infrastructure is really just about the roads and the railways and the ports. This is the only way to enable the movement of physical products, but it needs to be invested in. Otherwise, you don't have the foundation of e-commerce. And then internet infrastructure, the government in China for many, many years has been investing in telecom infrastructure to the point where 98% of all villages now have internet access. I've been to places that are accessible only by foot to get to these villages, but they had a great mobile internet network. So I mean, that's impressive, because then you see it pays dividends when you look at rural e-commerce and integration of these communities. So those are the basic elements. And then if you look at these other considerations, an integrated market. So you've got 1.4 billion people that are all under one system, harmonized tax and regulatory system. If you compare that to Africa, 54 countries, 1.3 billion people, they have much bigger challenges of harnessing that population. And I think this is the big question that ASEAN needs to address, is how to integrate the community such that those barriers do not become impediments to the growth of this digital economy. Education, China had its first e-commerce degree in 1999 offered at colleges, back when I don't think we really knew what e-commerce was, but it was still an effort to try and define it. And today, China graduates the largest number of STEM graduates in the world, and that is what's been powering the digital economy. The question, I guess, again, to ask here is, where is that talent going to come from in ASEAN, so that you don't require to import the skills, although it is increasing trend to offshore development work in places like India, even China, but the costs are a consideration. Government and policy. This is an interesting point, because what I argue is that government in China was very instrumental in helping spur the digital economy growth, not because of what they did, but because of what they didn't do. It was a late touch approach, which allowed a lot of experimentation. Regulations on payment didn't come until 7 years after the digital payment sort of system was created. Some might argue times have changed, but this is a global trend where I think there is a fear of big tech. But you have to think about when and where and how you want to regulate so that you don't stop the innovation before it happens. The entrepreneurship spirit is also an important thing. There are two regions in China that really led the digital sort of innovation, or three, I guess you'd say. It's Guangzhou, Zhejiang province, Hangzhou city, where Alibaba started, and then Zhongguancun in Beijing. But at least with regard to e-commerce, Guangdong province and Zhejiang province were really the leaders in e-commerce, because that's where the entrepreneurs really had been traditionally. And it's really trying to pair e-commerce with where the mindset is one such that they're willing to take risks and create businesses. And then the finance market is really about how do you attract investment, venture capital in particular, but also then the financial markets, and think about what are the policies that are encouraging but also discouraging venture capitalists from committing their money to the region. So those are the external factors. And then on the outside, I would also say there's these trends. And one of the things that really drove e-commerce in China was the domestic policies, particularly when the government tried to drive consumption. That's when Taobao, which many of you would know as Tmall as well, really took shape. And that's because the government was trying to push for more domestic consumption, and e-commerce became a solution for that because there was a lack of bricks and mortar retail. And then the one big global market trend that really drove e-commerce development in China during its rise of the digital economy was the accession to the WTO. And that is what drove exports from China, but because many of these manufacturers had no way of connecting to the world outside, they relied on the internet, and that drove the adoption of e-commerce. So I would say think about what are the domestic and global trends that are impacting ASEAN. We can talk about those as well. I think there are quite a few in its favor, although I know we are facing economic headwinds. There are ways to take advantage of that to help spur growth. Digital economy. So on top of these external factors, I argue there's 4 pillars that really help build the foundation of China's digital economy. It's e-commerce, it's digital finance, it's smart logistics, and it's cloud computing. And think about in each whether or not these pillars exist in Southeast Asia, which I do think they do exist, but how to leverage them, and then how to build all the other applications on top of that, whether it relates to education, health, AI, IoT, or IO everything, Dr. Kasan, and mobility, etc. This is how I see China's 20-year journey, how it evolved, and how it got us to where we are today. One thing I'll also share with you is during my time at Alibaba, we developed programs and we had a model by which we called it was an empowerment model to help spur the growth of the digital economy in China, but also outside of China. So I developed a training program in partnership with the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, but also along with universities and venture capitalists to create a multi-layer capacity building program where we worked with governments at the very top, ministers to share best practices in terms of digital economy development and what the China government did that helped enable businesses in China. And then we worked with entrepreneurs who were the platform builders, those who are building e-commerce marketplaces, payment systems, etc. And we shared best practices from an Alibaba perspective. Then we worked with the merchants or the professionals, those who were using the platforms to drive their business. And then we worked with universities to actually share curriculum that would develop digital talent in the universities and graduate them into these companies that were powering the digital economy. At the bottom, you see multilateral organizations, governments, associations, universities, training centers, and venture capital / incubators. These are all the organizations or entities that then help support the digital economy development in different ways. But they're also instrumental in contributing. But I would say that the way this all fits together is really the governments need to set the direction and the vision. The entrepreneurs then are given the space to build the platforms to enable the businesses to then power their operations and their businesses through the technology, and then the universities supply that talent. And this, was a very rewarding experience. The program still continues. But I think that my main point here is coming up with a way or an approach to link all of these elements together so that they're working in tandem and not against each other. And by the end of this program, we often had many of these entrepreneurs who were invited by ministers and prime ministers to provide a perspective on how the government can do more to enable the development of these industries. And when we talk about inclusive, these are just some examples of companies that have graduated from the program. And what I want to highlight here is not their size, but actually what they do for the community. Because I will say that today, champions like Gojek or GoTo, as they call it, Tokopedia here in Indonesia, Grab, as well, and other. And Shopee and Lazada, these are platform businesses that have really created businesses of scale and are becoming the pillars of the ASEAN market. There are also those that help support that. And Policy Street is a company that's operating in Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand, I believe. And they basically have made it their mission to serve the B40 or the bottom 40 of society by providing providing insurance, digital insurance products to the gig economy. A lot of the delivery workers, the food vendors on the streets, they don't have a way to protect themselves. And so Policy Street has actually been granted a license to underwrite insurance products that can be sold on a daily basis or a monthly basis, but at an affordable price to protect these workers who are part of the informal economy. And that, I think, is very important in terms of making the digital economy more inclusive. GoGet is also working with the gig economy, but they provide jobs, but they provide training, and they also provide a link to the government pension system. So when these gig workers get paid, part of that goes into, this is a Malaysian company, the Malaysian pension sort of plan, and that helps these informal workers actually save money for the long term. And so this is again trying to empower those who probably were overlooked in the previous sort of traditional economic system. Zagana is a Philippines company that basically links rural areas to cities through e-commerce, and this is an example of how to bring prosperity to the rural regions. And then eFishery, also an Indonesian company, is just to represent how the digital economy is everywhere. I never thought that fishermen would need e-commerce. Well, they need e-commerce, but all the other things like the tools to feed the fish, to monitor the fish, to even do financing for your fish breeding. This is an amazing company, not only in Indonesia, but they've spread throughout ASEAN and also in China. So I think that the lesson here is that you can reach all parts of society, all industries, but also ASEAN will become increasingly an innovator, not just for the region, but for the rest of the world, because the challenges that they're solving are also relevant to many other regions. And so just to wrap up, I'm sorry, I'm going a little too long here, but how to strengthen digital readiness. This again is probably things that you guys have already talked about, but I do think just to emphasize, ubiquitous connectivity is critical if we really want to be inclusive. This is both infrastructure build out, but also in terms of affordability. When I talk about enabling inter-ASEAN flows, again, this is a prerequisite. So data flows links to connectivity, financial flows is regulatory, but also enabling players beyond just the traditional banking system to be able to play a role in building out this digital finance network. And then product flow is really the physical infrastructure of logistics. Strengthening public-private partnerships, I think, is very important, but you have to be very conscious of it. So government policymakers have enough problems dealing with policy, but I think that you need to really reach out to the private sector and ask, what do you need? What can we do better? So that you can work in tandem and then allow them to do the work to actually fulfill the vision that the government hopes will be achieved. So governments create the enabling environment, businesses build the businesses and the platforms, and then both government and private sector should play a role in educating. Alibaba, for the first 5 years, basically spent all their time educating their customers. Our sales team were actually trainers more than salespeople because a lot of small businesses didn't know why the internet was relevant. So that, I think, is very important. And then let's talk about the geopolitical challenges that we face today. I would suggest that ASEAN uses a blue ocean approach. You pick the best of both the China model and the US model. There's lots to learn from both, but don't feel like you have to take a side when it comes to the digital economy. Figure out how to be inclusive of both sets of standards in business models. And I think ASEAN will be in good standing. So that's what I wanted to share today, and thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much, Brian. Very excellent and interesting presentation. I actually like your take on the empowerment model for digital transformation. I think that is something that would really help at least address the digital divide in ASEAN, given what you mentioned, the multi-layered approach to capacity building. I think that's, maybe we can talk more about that later during the Q&A. Let me now introduce our two panelists who will also share their views on issues related to ASEAN digital economy and digital transformation. So our first panelist is Mr. Iquan Nasution. He's currently the head of Center for International Affairs, Secretary General of Ministry of Communication and Information of Indonesia. But prior to that, he was with the National Public Procurement Agency of Indonesia for quite some time, for 12 years, where he served as Deputy Director in various directorates within the agency, including the Directorate for Development of Electronic Procurement System. Ms. Iquan here is also a research scientist when he first started his career at the Ministry for Marine and Fisheries of Indonesia. He got his undergraduate degree from Pajajaran University in Bandung and a graduate degree from Bremen University in Germany. So, Iquan, please. Yeah.
Very good morning for all the participants, Pak Kasan, Ibu Lili, Pak Brian, Pak Aladin, Ibu Monica, and all distinguished participants. It's my great honor to attend this event and present some views from the Ministry of Communication and Informatics especially on one of the important deliverables, Pak, during Indonesian Chairmanship in ASEAN this year, the ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreement, which is new issues for, I think, not only for the Ministry of Communication and Informatics, but also for almost all the institution in Indonesia. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This is the outline of my presentation. I would like to share about the current situations and conditions related to Indonesia digital landscape and also digital transformation, because from previous speakers we know that the digital transformation is very important in these recent years, especially after this, during and after the pandemic, which is we don't think we can do it before the pandemic. For example, work from home is a dream, but suddenly it's true during last 3 years. So digital transformations is very important, and I would like to share our ministry strategy for Indonesia digital transformation, and also what Indonesia can do to involve in the development of ASEAN DEVA. Next slide, please. This is the landscape of Indonesian digital condition right now. So from previous presenters, we know that in ASEAN condition related to the internet penetration, for example, in Indonesia, more than 77% of Indonesian population is using the internet in 2021-2022, and more than 370 million mobile devices is connecting to internet thanks to the cheaper and cheaper smartphone. But the price is still the issue of the price of internet connection is still the issues. And more than 210 million Indonesian is connecting to the internet. And when we discuss about the digital trade or digital economy, in 2021, the Indonesia's digital economic value is estimated $70 billion, which will increasing in 2025, estimated to 146 billion. And in 2023, will be more than 300 billion US dollar. So this is the competitiveness of Indonesia in the field of digital economy. And from this also there will be a challenge also for Indonesia if we want to involve in digital economy negotiations or agreement in the region or in the multilateral fora. Next. Ministry of Communication and Informatics to transfer to conduct the digital transformation have developed Indonesia's digital roadmap 2021 to 2024 that aims to provide the framework and stages to achieve an equal economic development based on innovation, digital connectivity, and technology. Indonesia focused on 4 areas to accelerate the infrastructure development, to enhance the government digital infrastructure, to strengthen the data governance, including cross-border data flow, and to extend the public communications, including through digital platform. This is the four our Ministry of Communication and Informatics focus in Indonesia's digital roadmap 2021 to 2024. Next slide, please. To implement the roadmap, Indonesia, especially in my ministry, is focused on 4 pillars: digital infrastructure, digital government, digital economy, and digital literacy. Those 4 pillars are the focus of Ministry of Communication and Informatics in digital transformations development. Regarding the digital infrastructure, Indonesia now have more than 450,000 kilometers of national fiber optic, which from eastern part to the western part, we already have fiber optic. And we also have 4G mobile broadband, which is already covering more than 70,000 villages all over Indonesia. We also develop and construct base transceiver stations, more than 550,000 BTS throughout Indonesia, also in outermost and what we call it in Indonesia, we call it 3T region, terluar, terpencil dan areas. And also we will launch the Satria satellite that we will cover more than 150,000 public facilities across Indonesia. And we also have a plan to launch other satellite to cover connection throughout Indonesia. Regarding the digital government, we have a program Satu Data Indonesia, and we will constructing data center, national data centers. In 2023, we will build national data center in 2 locations, in Bekasi near Jakarta and in Batam Island near Singapore. And after that, we will in 2025 we will also build other 2 national data center in New Capital in Nusantara and in Labuan Bajo in Nusa Tenggara Timur. So regarding the digital government in the Satu Data Indonesia, we will have in 2025 4 national data centers that will supply the need of Indonesian government related to digital. Regarding the digital economy, we will focus on development of digital startup, MSMEs, and also will support the priority sectors to be digitalized and enhance international cooperation through several international forums such as G20. Our ministry involved in the G20, especially in the Digital Economy Working Group. And also we have a cooperation with the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, regarding this digital economy. And the 4 pillar, the digital literacy, the Ministry of Communication and Informatics have program related to ICT, digital related courses and national programs. We have a scholarship to pursue ICT related study, not only in Indonesia but also in the various universities around the world, such as in NUS, Cambridge, and other universities. And also we have a cooperation with Google, Microsoft, Cisco, and other company to learn related to the ICT for Indonesian. Next slide, please. So now is the question: where is ASEAN going forward on digital economy? Because we already discussed related to the AC in 2022 related to some principles, for example, cross-border data on e-commerce, cybersecurity, and other issues. But in DEFA, what we will discuss? This is the question, because I think most of Indonesian is now digital economy term is quite new for Indonesian. We have experience to negotiate, to discuss regarding to e-commerce, but digital economy is beyond that, I think. And this is the one that we have to learn and to have the same understanding, not only in my ministry, but with other ministries, because digital economy, I think, have a lot of cross-cutting issues, which have to, the problem that we have to solve first is the same understanding related to the digital economy. Next slide, please. So this is the milestone that we know that now we have a studying process regarding to identify the gaps and the potential area. And after that, we have to have awareness, so have endorsement from the leaders. So we have a high level of awareness and support from the policy environment and starting point, which framework that as a legal starting point to launch a negotiation. So this is one of the deliverables that will be launched in Indonesia chairmanship in ASEAN. Next slide, please. So related to digital economy, from our experience in attending the first round of IPF, digital economy negotiation last December, there are a lot of issues or elements or things that we have to understand before we can start the negotiations. It's beyond the e-commerce, because for example, they put also in IPF, they put the issue on underwater cabling as one of the elements. So, like I said before, that we need to have the same understanding about what is the digital economy, what element that we want to negotiate or we want to discuss in DEFA, and in Indonesia especially, which sector that dealing with those specific elements. Because from IPF, my experience in IPF, even though most of the elements that offering by the US is in Indonesia is under the regulation of Ministry of Information and Ministry of Communication and Informatics, but other issues is also under various ministry regulations. So in Indonesia condition, I think we need to have one dirigent, the one that can give direction to which direction Indonesia would like to involve in digital economy agreement or digital economy framework, not only in DEFA, but also in other agreement that we will raise after digital economy become one big issue right now. So for example, the Ministry of Communication and Informatics, at least we have 3 forum that we involve right now: the DEFA, the IPF, and also in G20, Digital Economy Working Group. And I think there are some bilateral and multilateral also negotiation will be involved in the field of digital economy soon. So this is the issue in Indonesian. Next slide, please. So there are challenges for Indonesia. For example, a sectoral initiative. Sectoral initiative, we know that, like Pak Brian said, that Indonesia is one of the highest value of digital economy in the previous years. But digital economy in Indonesia has been driven almost exclusively by the private sector, but without sufficient public support. The benefits stemming from digital economy, especially to the MSMEs, cannot be properly developed. So MSMEs is one of the area that we have to focus and support. And even though that more than 70% of Indonesian is connected to internet, it's still the distribution is still uneven between the areas, between the genders, between the social economic status, education levels, and things like that. So uneven digital readiness and maturity is also the challenges for Indonesia before we involve in digital economy. Policy is also important and a challenge for us, for Indonesian, because like I said before, that digital economy is a cross-cutting issues that not one single ministries that can have regulations, but also from other ministries. Next slide, please. So this is the strategies of ASEAN DEVA. We have to have the mapping or prioritization about the key elements that are to be adopted in DEVA, and I think it should be based on the readiness level of ASEAN member states, because as far as I understand, that the level of readiness on ASEAN member state, between ASEAN member state on digital economy is different from one to another. I think some countries have already have agreement related to digital economy, like Singapore, but other countries still learn what is digital economy. So this is the gap. We have also understanding the importance of talent or skill, because we have to recognize the talent and skill as one of the important key elements to bridge the gap on digital economy. That's why our ministry, since a few years ago, have a special scholarship for talent for Indonesian to learn and to study, not only in the graduate schools, but also from the basic knowledge on digital. And involvement of SMEs is also very important, because they are one of the important players on digital economy, especially in Indonesia. And also the emerging elements, because we know that emerging element is one of the important elements in digital economy, and should be considered as a cooperation and mutual-based commitment, because not all ASEAN member states have same condition and same view on emerging elements. I think that's all my presentation, Pak Aladin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Ikwan, for providing some Indonesian perspectives on digital economy issues, particularly on this new agreement, the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, which is, I think, very, very important for the region. Moving on, I would like to call our next speaker, Dr. Monica Wiharja. Monica is currently a visiting fellow at ICE's Yusuf Ishak Institute. Prior to that, she was with the World Bank and the Poverty and Equity Global Practice of the bank. She was also with the Office of the President as Senior Advisor to the Deputy Chief of Staff. And she also represented Indonesia at various T20 meetings. Monica was also a faculty member for 4 years at University of Indonesia and has done extensive research in food security and agricultural reforms, jobs, digital economy, as well as regional and global architecture. A very highly educated economist, got her BA from Brown, her MPhil in economics from Cambridge, and her PhD in regional science from Cornell. Monica, please.
Thank you, for inviting me to speak in this very important and interesting discussion. And it's really good to be back with old friends, Pak Kasan, Ibu Lili, Brian, and meeting new friends here. I'm also not an expert on ASEAN, digital economy, trade agreement myself, but then perhaps I could share some insights from more of the academics perspective. So my presentation will cover pretty much like this 5 broad categories. I hope I have more than 7 minutes for my 23 slides. So I will talk a little bit about what ASEAN aspires to, learning from the most recent development on the Boracay Digital Declaration that was just that just happened about 1-2 weeks ago, moving ASEAN towards synergy, moving towards a sustainable digital future. And I'm also going to cover challenges arise with wide socioeconomic disparities between and within countries in ASEAN, as well as regulatory gaps and disparities. And thirdly, this is perhaps what I've been focusing on in terms of working on digital economy, is to look at how the heterogeneous impacts of digital transformation. And it's very important because we don't want to leave anyone behind with this digital transformation. And at the same time, we have to know who are the winners and losers from digital transformation. And also, I'm gonna look at a little bit from the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement of Singapore together with Chile and New Zealand, and draw some insights for potential guiding principles for the ASEAN DEPA. And I'm going to also propose some frameworks or some pillars of what ASEAN digital community could constitute, because I know that specifically for this panel discussion, we're going to talk about the trade aspects of digital community, but then it's really hard to disentangle the market aspect from the broad aspects of digital community. So as perhaps many of you know, that on February 9 to 10, the ASEAN digital ministers met and adopted the Boracay Digital Declarations, and guided by the existing document of ASEAN Digital Master Plan 2025, the declaration recognizes, from how I see the declarations, recognizes 3 important initiatives. One is the importance of a digitally inclusive society by addressing digital divides. And then second important initiative is to have a trusted digital market by protecting privacy and security and adopting necessary digital governance governing emerging technologies, including data safeguards and the emerging technologies of AI. And then the third initiative is to have people-centered digital government. And interestingly, as the title suggests, that ASEAN also wants to move to a more sustainable digital future. So the declaration underlines the importance of sustainability principles of digital transformation, which I'm going to touch upon in my last slide. So as already many of our previous speakers mentioned, ASEAN has made some great strides moving towards a digital community. And from what I understand is that under Indonesia's ASEAN Chairmanship this year, and Indonesia plans to complete its feasibility study for the ASEAN Digital Economic Framework and start negotiation that is to be concluded in 2025. Although Pak Kasan already mentioned that it would be nice to accelerate the negotiation to have it concluded this year under Indonesia's chairmanship. And Digital Economy Framework Agreement is inspired by digital-only agreements, the so-called Digital Economy Agreement. We already have a Digital Economy Partnership Agreement that is open to all members of WTO, and currently there are 3 members to this Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, namely Singapore, New Zealand, and Chile. And in November 2021, also the accession process for China has commenced as well. And I believe South Korea has already also tried to onboard in this Digital Economy Partnership Agreement. And it's not a surprise that we need a digital-only agreement that is not a typical trade agreement. Digital Economy Agreement aims to facilitate cross-border collaboration on wide-ranging issues such as data trade and flows, personal data protection, digital ID, and AI governance. And I personally believe that the feasibility study for the ASEAN Digital Economy Framework is very important, not only to help navigate how to achieve more integrated market, society, and government, but also to anticipate the heterogeneous impacts of a more integrated digital community in ASEAN. As already mentioned by many of our previous speakers, also that we have a wide disparities in terms of digital readiness among ASEAN member states. For example, if we use the ASEAN Digital Integration Index, then we have Brunei, Malaysia, Singapore, whose scores above the ASEAN average for all of the 6 dimensions in this index, namely digital trade and logistics, data protection and cybersecurity, digital payments and identities, digital skills and talents, innovation and entrepreneurship, and institutional and infrastructural readiness. While Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar are below the ASEAN average for all 6 dimensions. Also, using the Cisco's Digital Readiness Index, Singapore ranked number 1, while countries like Laos rank below 100. So this just show the wide disparities of digital readiness among ASEAN member states. And there are also stark regulatory gaps and disparities. First is on data safeguard. It's unevenly regulated in ASEAN, and we can see data safeguards composing of 3 main regulatory elements. The first one is on cybersecurity, the second one is on non-personal data, and the third one is on personal data. On cybersecurity, the Philippines, interestingly, the Philippines actually has the most comprehensive regulatory framework for cybersecurity, followed by Vietnam, Singapore, and Laos. I mean, interestingly, although by Digital Readiness Index, Singapore always ranked very high, but living in Singapore, I also noticed that is not always secure or safe in terms of cybersecurity. I mean, For example, like I often get like calls from China actually, pretending to be the Ministry of Health of Singapore. So I was just wondering, and I have a Singapore mobile phone. In any case, so we can break down cybersecurity regulatory elements in this 18 sub-elements. This table is derived using the World Bank's Global Data Regulation Diagnostic Survey in 2021. And as you can see that the ASEAN countries pretty much lag behind in terms of data security measures, including, for example, encryption of personal data, and also internal adoptions of cybersecurity standards. And on safeguarding non-personal data, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam have constituted the intellectual property rights to prevent the sharing of non-personal data, while some other countries are still absent in terms of this safeguarding non-personal data. And interestingly, also on passing personal data protection laws, Singapore, Malaysia, and the Philippines are the early movers. Thailand and Indonesia only passed their data privacy laws in 2022, and Vietnam aims to pass its data privacy law by 2024. So these are like just some regulatory gaps and disparities in ASEAN countries that will be like a challenge to have standard regulations for ASEAN. And just moving forward, you know, we all need like trust when we use digital technologies and share our data. And to build trust in data governance and management as a preconditions to a more integrated digital market society and government, I think you know, the ASEAN feasibility study could look into how we can pass personal data protection laws across all ASEAN countries that follow good regulatory practices and promote interoperability. And also to accelerate the adoptions of coherent data security measures and cybersecurity requirements, and to help countries that lag behind in terms of capacity building, to build domestic capacity for domestic regulatory reforms in regards to data safeguardings. And ASEAN could use the already existing bodies, including the ASEAN Network Security Action Council, the Working Group on Digital Data Governance, and ASEAN Coordinating Committee on Electronic Commerce to help with narrowing these regulatory gaps and disparities. And second is on data localization. We have also quite wide disparities in terms of data localization, pretty much driven by national security motives and public security motives. So the Philippines and Singapore allow all data, including personal data, to flow freely across borders with minimal regulatory requirements. Indonesia and Vietnam completely or partially prohibits cross-border data flows for reasons of public and national security. And Malaysia and Thailand allow cross-border data flows conditional on rigorous compliance requirements. Meanwhile, ASEAN largest trading partners like the US, China, and EU also adopt different cross-border data flow standards, with China being the most restrictive and US being the least restrictive. And I think ASEAN could use ASEAN Trade Repository Body to make sure that regulations in regards to data localization is being passed with, you know, transparency and good regulatory practices. So ASEAN Trade Repository could be expanded to policy areas affecting the digital economy in ASEAN, including data localization regulations. And there are other regulatory gaps and disparities. For example, different ASEAN countries adopt different de minimis provisions, which is the minimum value of goods below which no tariffs or taxes are collected at the border. And of course, you know, we still have challenge in terms of regulating competition issues in regards to digital economy. There are also regulatory gaps and disparities in terms of more harmonized tax policies, subsidies, and industrial policies. As we know about the US CHIPS Act, for example, on subsidies on technology companies. And soon, or if not like now, we need governance on emerging technologies such as AI and fintech. And perhaps, this is one of my favorite subjects on how to look at digital transformations, is to make sure that no one left behind. No one is left behind, and how to compensate losers. Because from my various studies, it's in Indonesia, at least, it's very, very clear. We have strong hard evidence that there are heterogeneous impacts, on the labor market, on the society in terms of digital transformation. So as you can see from the graph on the left-hand side, this is from a recent nationally representative opinion poll conducted by my institute last year in July 2022, which reinforces the findings on the World Bank's Digital Economy Flagship Report showing Indonesia's digital divide. So as you can see from the graph, for example, elementary school educated people, only 31.4% of them actually have access to mobile broadband or internet data packages, while 92% of those with university degrees have access to mobile broadband and internet data package. And I have an ongoing study, 3 streams of study looking at the heterogeneous impacts on the labor market from internet adoptions and digital transformation in Indonesia. And the 3 of them show strong evidence on how digital transformation will impact different types of workers differently. Both looking at three different streams of studies from the skill bias technological chains, where we show that internet penetrations has increased skills premia in Indonesia, meaning that returns from broader internet adoptions is actually larger for more educated workers, which is already have greater advantage from the education premium. And then the second, we look at from the perspective of task bias technological change. So digital transformation doesn't necessarily adversely impact people with low education, but people with certain types of jobs, or like task content of jobs, in particular, disfavoring people with routine jobs. And also we look at the impact of digital investment in Indonesia, and interestingly, we have some findings how digital investment in Indonesia also have heterogeneous impacts on different types of workers in Indonesia. And just to shed some lights on some elements in the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement signed by Singapore, Chile, and New Zealand. As you can see here, it's basically all very comprehensive, looking at not only data trades and flows, but also online consumer protection, digital inclusivity, governance on data protection. So I think this is where we have to go eventually when we look at Digital Economy Framework Agreement. It cannot be just isolated to let's say trade on data and data flows, or MSMEs, but we need to talk, for example, about digital ID, right? And even for example, the impacts on mental well-being of the society. So some possible guiding principles to ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreements, just drawing on the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement. First of all, I think ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreement should fill the gaps in global digital governance. because right now there's like absence in global digital governance. If there is, it's very fragmented. So and this could be done by aligning standards and addressing new issues brought about by digitalization, right? I mean, it's easier to standardize rules, within 10 ASEAN member countries than to have, global than to standardize rules for all countries in the world. And I think what we can also learn from the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement is that agreements, rules, and cooperation must continue to evolve. It have to be, made flexible from the perspective of time, because 1 or 2 years from now, we don't know what kind of technologies will emerge. And then the third guiding principle could recognize the rights to preserve the flexibilities of countries to set legislative and regulatory priorities, safeguard public welfare, and protect legitimate public policy objective. But as the fourth possible guiding principle basically could be built upon is to set rules. So even though we need to give flexibility of countries, but there has to be rules to govern exemptions, to limit discrimination and promote transparency and predictability, and constraints protectionist policies. And then the last possible guiding principles is to build trust across sovereign systems as to avoid a lowest common denominator approach. So this is just some ideas of like what ASEAN digital community might look like. So I see an ASEAN digital community comprising of 3 pillars. The first one is to have a trusted digital market, and for that, we need physical and digital connectivity and interoperability, harmonized regulation, for example, competition laws, and minimal standards of cybersecurity, data governance, management, and privacy. And then the second pillar is on ASEAN inclusive digital society. We need to universalize access to digital connectivity. And as some of my ongoing study shows that we need educational reforms, more inclusive educational policies, and certified trainings and other lifelong learning skill development programs, because there will be losers in this digital transformation. And also we need to review and revise some element of our labor laws, definition, and standards because of the changing natures of jobs. We need to protect consumers, and also we might have to think about having a charter on mental well-being. And then the third pillar is more digitalized government in ASEAN, and that is to help ASEAN countries to set up digital ID systems and interoperability across ASEAN. And then the second one is to move towards standardized public service delivery that is delivered with the use of digital technologies across ASEAN. And the third one is a roadmap towards implementations of the once and only principle, so that ASEAN citizens don't have to give information again and again to get some public or private services. I noticed that since I arrived in Jakarta yesterday, my face, there are like machines that take like facial recognitions of my face twice, and sometimes like I wonder how it's going to be used, right? Because in any case, with once and only principle, basically you only have to give standard information only once, right? And we also need citizens' e-participation as feedback mechanism of digital transformation. And perhaps I would like to also mention that we can only achieve ASEAN digital community when we have clear definitions of digital economy, as what Pak Ivan already mentioned, right? Because right now it's still very unclear and undefined, and there has to be data-driven monitoring and frameworks of the impacts of digital transformation. And lastly, just want to touch upon the sustainability aspect. So as we transform to a more digitally connected society, we will need more and more of data storage capacity. And data center across ASEAN will need to be more energy efficient. Because data centers are land, carbon, energy, and water intensive. For example, by 2040, Indonesia is predicted to, that data center activities in Indonesia could potentially account for 1/4 of electricity consumption in the country. So if we don't move into more sustainable or energy efficient data centers, then our target for an ASEAN digital community could be in conflict with its own net zero carbon emission target. The most countries that has the binding constraints in terms of sustainability aspect is Singapore. So ASEAN depends largely on Singapore for data centers. In 2020, Singapore imposed a moratorium on data centers, which was lifted in 2022 with the pilot phases of sustainable facilities led to the growth of data centers in neighboring countries. I mean, with Singapore's moratorium, this led to the growth of data centers in neighboring countries. And only about like a few weeks ago, Singapore signed a deal with Indonesia to build the Batam data center, which will use dual source power, including the latest technologies in clean and renewable energy. And I think this collaboration will be needed in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Monica, for a very comprehensive presentation. I think that wraps up the key presentations for this seminar. But before we move on to the more exciting part, which is the Q&A, let me now ask two other experts to share their views on the issue of digital economy. So let me start with Ms. Jessica Wow, Deputy Director of Singapore Institute of International Affairs, to provide some interventions. Jessica, thank you.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the very insightful presentations. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this event. Just a brief introduction of myself. I help to lead the ASEAN program at the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, where we champion ASEAN integration. We track the political and economic developments in the region. And I work closely with my boss, Professor Simon Tay, who's the chairman, and he's been building networks across the region to ensure ASEAN integration. I think I want to start a little bit by stepping back, provide a bit of historical context, the current context and the future context in terms of Singapore's position. So I think Singapore, given its status as a small country with lack of resources, we've benefited a lot from trade. And if you look at in the past, the many free trade agreements that Singapore has proactively tried to sign has opened up for Singapore markets, opened up opportunities and created jobs. And of course, this has led to tariff reductions. And this has also got the region on board with some of the free trade agreements that are across the region. And I start off by talking about free trade agreements because I know we're talking about digital, but I think the same motivations apply because we are trying to bring benefits to the whole region, trying to leverage on ASEAN as a whole market. But the current context is that it's digital. And so as some of the earlier speakers have mentioned, we need rules for the digital economy that underpins the economic growth for this region. So that's why Singapore has started with the digital economy agreements, linking up with like-minded countries and recognizing that it's time to update some of these free trade agreements. And if you look at the Australian-Singapore DEA, that's essentially what was needed. We had a free trade agreement and we needed to upgrade it to a digital economy agreement. And I can see that this is what is happening for Southeast Asia and for ASEAN. And Singapore sees Southeast Asia as a priority for digital. One of our senior ministers of state said that ASEAN needs to be a rules-based digital society founded on neutral, interoperable standards-based systems. And these DEAs help to establish frameworks that make digital trade and e-commerce standards and systems interoperable. So these systems, right, these new systems need to be able to talk to one another. So the move towards paperless invoicing, for example, both countries need to be able to accurately recognize and verify trade-related certification. And another underlying requirement is that all parties have to be like-minded in the area of information sharing. So as Monica shared earlier on, that data is what's going to drive the digital economy. And also Brian mentioned that we need to enable cross-border intra-ASEAN flows. So countries that have more open data policies will be able to facilitate some of these agreements that we're trying to push forward. And also this will help to boost the environment for economic growth and innovation. But of course, they need to have certain standards and security aspects when it comes to the cross-border data flows. So that's the current context. And I think for Southeast Asia region, it has been mentioned quite a few times that there's a diversity in terms of readiness and levels of development. But in the example of China, they were able to leapfrog. And I think there's the opportunity for Southeast Asian countries to also leapfrog if we join this digital economy framework agreement and be able to move quickly on the negotiations. And then just in terms of talking about future context, I know we have not put the digital economy framework agreement into place yet. But I think for us in Singapore, and especially my institute, we're working a lot on the digital sustainability aspects. And sustainability can actually be a driver for companies to go digital. So through these agreements, there's opportunity for deeper cooperation, not only on digitalization, but sustainability. And I know a lot of some countries in Southeast Asia have already stated their plans for carbon neutrality in the coming years. So that's a report that our institute is actually working on and will be launched in June. So that's something that we can aspire towards, but it's something to keep in mind as well. I think just responding to some of what I heard earlier, I think Pak Ikwan, you mentioned the challenges of Indonesia's digital economy, about how it's not limited to e-commerce, but now it spreads across many aspects. For Singapore, that has also been the case, and we have also provided this whole of government approach. So the different ministries need to talk to one another. And I think the inclusivity portion is also an issue that Singapore has faced. So what Singapore has done, especially during the pandemic, is they've created a lot of initiatives for SMEs, which also drive Singapore's economy. SMEs go digital. And for Singapore's particular context, we have seniors as well. So there's a seniors go digital. So I think the inclusion part of cannot be ignored for Southeast Asia as it tries to come with a digital economy framework agreement. And involving the private sector as well has been what Singapore has done quite effectively I think we're fortunate to have a lot of the foreign tech companies based in Singapore, and they've helped in terms of education, building up readiness. So that's been very helpful for us. Just lastly, I think I think for us, we would like ASEAN to increasingly, I think Brian mentioned this, that ASEAN can become the innovator. And I think if we're able to work together as a region, that can happen and that can drive growth. But as Monica mentioned, trust will be very important. And what we're trying to build with this digital economy framework agreement is also a framework of trust, right? How can we trust that the data being sent across borders is going to be safe and secure, but also help the small businesses to benefit as well as they digitally transform. And essentially, this would be a win-win situation for all the ASEAN countries. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Now I would like to ask my colleague, Dr. Ha, for some interventions. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Danti Theng Ha. I'm an economist at the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. I think I'm the last speaker of today's. I don't like to be the last speaker because the disadvantage is that I run out of ideas because all the key things have been addressed earlier. So basically, my comments on Vietnam just echo what has been observed by our previous speakers regarding the potential, as in the case of Indonesia, as well as the challenges and bottlenecks, as also has been mentioned by Brian and as well as Dr. Maria and Ms. Jessica on infrastructure or supporting services or skills or data security. So I would just touch upon a bit on each piece regarding the case of Vietnam. I'm going to start first with a picture of e-commerce in Vietnam, because basically we talk about digital economy, but at this stage, implementation is still limited with e-commerce being relatively faster. So then after that, I'm going to move on to the regulator framework and the challenges that we are facing. So as we start with a picture, so similar to the case of Indonesia, Vietnam also has a large and growing population with very large potential for digital transformation. Now talking to e-commerce, because it's a relatively faster area of growth, we see a very impressive growth rate of about 20% per year from 2015 to 2020. And the share of business to consumer e-commerce in total retail sales also increased from about 3 to 5% within this period. This statistics was a bit outdated because we didn't take into account the recent development, especially after COVID-19. So I believe the figure would be noticeably larger if we take into account the recent statistics. And then e-commerce turnover, as forecasted by several reports, is expected to grow of about 30% per year for the period from 2020 to 2025. And the business-to-business e-commerce is also catching up, although slower than the B2C market. So that's the picture and the recent growth. I don't have much to share outside of e-commerce because, as I mentioned, the implementation is still relatively limited. On the regulator framework, we have introduced and revised various laws and under-law documents to address the new development of digital economy. And as early as 2005, the government has already passed 3 laws that laid the foundation for e-commerce. That is the commercial law, the civil code, and the electronic transaction law. And now the discussion for revision is being conducted, but no concrete proposals have been introduced yet. And then in 2015, we also had the cybersecurity law. And together with the law, we also have a system of under-law legal documents, national initiative. For example, more recently, we have a couple of decisions from the Prime Minister regarding the boosting IT application and digital transformation for trade promotion activities, as well as the national strategy on developing digital economy and digital society. In the latter one, very ambitious goals have been set regarding digital transformation, for example, regarding the contribution of digital economy in total GDP, by industry, by trade ratio, by ratio of SMEs using digital platform, or by labor force indicators. So they introduced various indicators and set quite ambitious goals, I would say. And the reforms are aimed at comprehensively various aspects, including institution, infrastructure on digital platform, digital data, security, human resources. So the enterprises as well. So various aspects related to digital economy. And on top of the national domestic reform, we have also been benefited from the participation in the new generation FTAs, such as the CPTPP, the RCEP, or the EVFTA, the European Vietnam FTA, which also contains commitments on e-commerce, for example, e-commerce policies, consumer protection. And also we have been a member of the ASEAN, and we participate in various ASEAN's initiatives on the digital economy. At the bilateral level, we haven't really got any significant agreement yet, except for the MOU with Singapore, which was just signed recently, I think earlier this month, on digital transformation and green transformation. So the MOU listed several areas on technical assistance, information sharing, and capacity building. And then the challenges are very similar, as have been mentioned earlier. On the infrastructure, we have still limited download speed of the internet, services infrastructures such as electronic invoice, payment infrastructure, logistic, etc. are still limited. And then there's this issue of unbanked population. Brian has mentioned this is a potential plus for the development of digital economy. But on the other hand, the lack of access to bank account means that a still significant proportion of the population use cash for daily expenditures, as much as 80% according to a government's report. And for transaction with value less than 100,000 Vietnam dong, maybe you can buy 2 bowls of pho with that amount. 98% of transactions are in cash. Then we also have problem with outdated laws. So as I mentioned earlier, we had some law which were introduced as early as 2005, but the revision is a bit slow. So there's this time lag between regulations and the speed of the new e-commerce models, because it's growing so fast and legal frameworks cannot catch up fast enough. And Vietnam is also quite restrictive compared to other ASEAN countries in terms of digital trade. We rank relatively low compared to some other ASEAN partners such as Thailand, Malaysia, Brunei, Singapore, Philippines in terms of restriction to foreign investment, competition policy, and in terms of data present. So that the content access, we rank second only after China. So I mean from bottom up. The third challenge is on infrastructure, as I mentioned as well. So the lack of and also the lack of skilled workers who can utilize and develop the digital development. And from the private sector, there lacks also the dynamic from the private sector in terms of innovation, R&D, and also the absorptive capacity of the domestic sector is also a big issue that has been extensively discussed. We have received lots of FDI, but the spillovers is limited, and the linkage between the FDI and domestic sector is also very weak. So those are a few issues that we are facing, and that those will be the issues that we need to tackle in order to really move forward with the digital economy framework. Thank you.
Thanks, Saha. I think don't worry, we're always reserving the best for last. I think we've heard a lot already, right, over the last an hour or so. And it's very interesting to note how the different perspectives and ideas have focused on the same issues and challenges, right? Whether we're talking about the case of Indonesia, Singapore, or in Thailand or the Philippines, I think issues and challenges somehow have some kind of common denominator. So I think now is the time to ask the questions, given what we've heard, from our experts. And I would encourage you to be very specific with your question. And also, since this is a trade policy advisory group event, I think it will be good also to take into consideration what are the policy implications or perspectives that we can take away from this seminar. So now the floor is open for questions to our experts here.
Thank you for presentation for all the speakers. I think I would like to raise maybe questions. At present, we kind of agree to a mega trend, what we call digital transformations. We mentioned about AI, internet, big data, robots, and now we even are building a metaverse. We may look, the digital world is a kind of parallel world to our real world. But I think what we should anticipate that the digital transformations will threat the existence of humans, kind of a human sense I won't say threat the existence of human beings. In terms of in the global order, have we agreed the border, the limit of the digital transformations that we should not pass the border in order to create a sustainable human civilizations? What are the limits of digital transformations that we should not cross? What are the how deep the implementation of a digital technology should involve in our human activities? For example, now we have a law to set the certain age to drive a car, a motorbike, or even to buy cigarettes. But should we start to think the limit to access the digital things, like maybe access the limit to certain age to have smartphones for children, or also to have access the limit hours to access the games? I don't know. This is, I think, at the policy level, we should start to think about. Thank you. I think Brian or Maria may have a response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I collect another question, then we can ask the experts to answer. Yeah, Ibu, please.
Thank you, Mr. Liano. Based on what Mary said about possible guiding principle to ASEAN DEVA, Mr. Iwan, from your point of view, what is the main priority that should be given to improve the readiness level of Indonesia to participate in DEVA? Conclusion.
Tin, I know that you want to ask some question. I know. Okay. Yes, Jessica.
I'm not sure if this question is to be answered here, but I'll just throw it up for thinking. I think also because it was mentioned in the Boracay Declaration, it's basically the aspect of ASEAN model contractual clauses. So it was created to facilitate to ensure that data would be protected and secure, but businesses would still be able to transact seamlessly across borders. But I'm questioning the usage of it, given that it's a nice word that's used, but how many, like, are companies actually using it? Are countries actually using it? I think that will be my question, because that would also help us to think about what we're trying to implement and whether we're just coming up with titles, but not tracking the implementation and the usage. I think that's quite important. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. I think we've heard the questions, wonders on the limitation of digital transformation from our colleague from Indonesia, then also on DEVA for Ikman, and then also from Jessica on related to the Boracay digital declaration. So maybe we can ask the speakers to respond. Maybe I can start with Brian, and then the rest of the speakers can also do it later. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a very fair question that you asked. I think people are increasingly concerned about the ramifications of technology on everyday human life, particularly now with AI. Generative AI is affecting people's feelings about their future jobs as well. But I guess I would take the position, it's just my personal opinion, that you don't know what the ramifications are until you really see this play out, and you sort of have to, I think that historically there's always been concerns, whether it's the automobile, the computer, or even things before that. And what I do like is this process of iterative policy making that's been happening, because it's not that people are unaware, it's just that they're monitoring, and then they're going to create policies as is necessary. I think the bigger risk is that you try and over-regulate it and then you stop the innovation. I mean, at least that's what I'll say from the China experience. I think that the government gave a lot of space to the companies, and that's what allowed for a lot of disruption to take place in commerce, in payments, in logistics. What we see today might be an overreaction to maybe this explosion of innovation, to the point where I think that they have to kind of pull back. But I don't think, from what I can see in this private sector experience in China, that that approach was more harmful than good. But there are some ramifications, like biotechnology, right? I mean, some things you let it out of the box, you can't put it back, and those are ethical concerns. Also, I do think the reason why there's a concern of too much power with big tech is because then they can control aspects of society that are actually the domain of government. And so, to that extent, I think you need to draw the line. But when it comes to things that are maybe less critical, then maybe you can give a little bit more room.
Yeah, I guess the issue is so broad that
Philosophical.
yeah, but I guess I would like to see it from two different levels of like to how we should see how we govern like emerging technologies and the impacts on human civilization. At the micro level, I mean, this is my personal experience. I'm losing the skills of like using correct spellings or grammars, because everything is already like self-corrected. So I'm starting to forget like how to spell like certain words, right? And interestingly, Henry Kissinger, who has like basically a long historical view of how the world is changing, right? Interestingly, he brings up the issues of leadership issues like globally, because of the lack of deep learning. So we see in a younger generation, they like to look for information through like social medias and learn from social medias, right? And fewer and fewer of young people actually read books. So his concern about deep learning and like a crisis in global leadership because the lack of deep learning. So that's at the micro level, right? But if you talk about like AI, for example, or like autonomous weapons, we still don't have like global governance like what we have with nuclear technologies, and we know that AI has the risk of like basically destroying humanities. And now we're moving from like AI to space economy. Elon Musk targets 42,000 low orbit internet spacecraft, basically, circling our Earth, and it's at the hands of like one person, right? So I think as Brian mentions, as long as there are like rules and governance in place, right? I think we can make a lot of use of technologies, and including like data, because data is non-rivalry. When I use data, you can also use the data, not like goods and services, right? And there's like increasing returns to data as well. So if we have like proper rules, regulations, governance in terms of data flows, then it's going to be very good for the economy, for welfare and humanity, right? But again, there has to be like standards and rules governing data flows and data trade, right? at the more micro level, we do need like global governance for like AI and perhaps like other emerging technologies. And what I fear is that although like, we can use digital technologies for better human welfare, but at the same time, it's increasingly used for surveillance and for automation, not necessarily increasing humans' productivity, but to automate things that could replace like, workers and humans in the labor market. Yeah.
Yes, sir. I would like to respond, Ibu, concern regarding the what Indonesia should do in DEFA. I think we have to have same understanding first in Indonesia regarding what is the digital economy, what is the element that we have to discuss in the DEFA or we have to negotiate in the DEFA. And also we have to try to reduce the gap. For example, the gap on the digital skills or digital literacy, the gap on the connectivity, the gap on the regulatory gaps with other ASEAN member states before we can discuss more on the DEFA, because for example, the artificial intelligence is the policy is developed by BRIN, Indonesia Research Agency, and also other institutions also have responsible to other elements in digital economy. So we have to have like one same understanding regarding those elements. So I think that's the first steps that Indonesia should conduct before we can start the DEFA negotiation, especially after we have the result of the study from Kemdag, I think, regarding the readiness of DEFA. And regarding the data, yeah, for Indonesia, now we have a policy that data can be transferred. Only data related to the government that have to stays in Indonesia. The data center have to be in Indonesia, but other data can be placed everywhere. I think so.
Thank you, Pak. I think maybe just going back to the question on the limitations of digital technologies. I think I like what Brian said, that is this a reflection of we're just overreacting maybe on some of the things, or is it a reflection also of the lack of understanding, right, of what these technologies are? I think we all recognize that there are definitely limits to what technologies can do, right? There are definitely gaps that we need to address. But at the end of the day, I think it's a matter of changing the mindset, right, of the people in terms of understanding what this digital transformation is all about. Because without that kind of mindset, then I don't think we will be able to really get the society be engaged in this digital transformation. I think like what Brian mentioned about the empowerment model that you mentioned, looking at how the different stakeholders can be engaged and let them understand what this digital transformation is all about. I don't think this is something that we need to be fear of, right? Because I think digitalization is here to stay, right? It's just a matter of people, of any country, to be ready for it. And I think that is what this digital transformation is all about, transforming the mindset so that everybody is on the same page as far as understanding what the risks are. Yeah, Brian.
I want to add to that and just say that it's critical to think of technology should serve humans, not humans serve technology. And you talk about human-centric, Monica, and I think that's critical, but it needs to start at the top down, and when we're creating the narrative and when policies are being enacted, how do we instill in the minds of policymakers, but also entrepreneurs, the purpose of this technology? Because what I think is the most amazing thing is that these emerging markets are creating tools for societal good, but they have a business model. And that's something that most cynical people in the business world would say is not really feasible. But I do think there's always a dark and a light side to anything, technology, or especially these industrial revolutions. But you need to get more people on the side of the good than the bad in order to ensure that we have progress, as opposed to destroy humanity through these innovations.
Julia.
More than a question, I have a few comments, but I promise I will be very brief. Just to continue the conversation we just started. I fully agree. I mean, any big transformation offers opportunities, but also risks or challenges. And, you know, we need to have, rather than a very sensationalistic conversation, this is so good or this is too bad, an adult conversation, these are the opportunities, these are the risks, what should we do about that? And, you know, providing people with the right skills to understanding transformation is a very important way to empower them so that they can face the risks, understand what are the threats, and also take advantage of the opportunities. This is why, I mean, skills are so important in this conversation. And actually, I'm very happy that we touched upon very different topics. I think it's very important for any framework for the digital economy of ASEAN to go a little bit beyond digital commerce or e-trade only. I mean, we know we are here at the Ministry of Trade. E-commerce is a very, very fundamental building block, but there are other aspects of the digital transformation that should go in any fully fledged digital economy strategy for ASEAN or G20 or other regions. Brian already talked extensively about innovation and entrepreneurship. This is certainly a very, very important aspect. And Pak Ikwan, we had the opportunity to collaborate with your colleagues for the G20 Digital Innovation Network last year. And a lot of the conversation that took place at G20 Dean level, I think, is very relevant for the discussion that we're having today. Then, I mean, there's so much about skills, there's so much about business creation, and so on and so forth. And even the issue of skills, again, on one hand, it's clearly related to trade. I mean, we need to teach everybody how to sell and trade goods or services online. But there are other types of skills that are getting very important, and I think you just referenced to those. Think about, I mean, now the digital transformation, people are getting very confused. Is this document a fake? Is this document something real? So new generations and even people like us, we should try to find a way to learn how, you know, to distinguish from these very different components. So probably the skill sets that will be required in the future for the digital transformation are not exactly the same as the one are currently given to students in school, high school, university, and so on and so forth. Also because in the future, perhaps there will be very important ethical dilemmas. If we think about that, also regulators will have to face. If you think about autonomous vehicles, you know, there's an algorithm that is predicting the way the car or, you know, any kind of motorbike is going to go. And, you know, the algorithm is predicting that there will be an accident and, you know, either the passenger or the pedestrian person will have to be killed. So what should we prioritize? I mean, it's not maybe for now, but these are dilemmas that in the future, regulators and society will have to face. And, you know, maybe we will have to work together, economists, technologists, with people with an ethical background to try to address some of these challenges. So it's very complex. Then something else that I think Maria highlighted very well, which I think is very, very important, the issue of looking not only at jobs, but at tasks. I think this is really crucial, and it emerged clearly in some of the analysis I did in my previous job at USCD. Sometimes looking at tasks is predictive of, you know, the chances to be replaced by a robot or become unemployed. If we think about a cook, it's very different to be a cook at McDonald's or in a Michelin-starred restaurant. If you think about a weaver, it could be very different, you know, to be someone weaving for fast fashion or be extremely artistic and sophisticated. So the difference is the level of innovation that you put into your tasks. So this is why also transitioning towards to more innovation and knowledge-intensive economies is so crucial because it's going to protect a lot of workers from the threat of becoming unemployed, robots, and so on and so forth. Obviously, it's something that is going to require time, but it's probably issues that should go into this conversation about the future strategy for the digital economy of the region. And then maybe my final word, just two things. One is also about what something Maria mentioned. Anyway, be reassured, I think you already know it very well. It's not only in Singapore or ASEAN. I keep getting calls even on my French mobile because someone is selling, you know, the data of my personal number. That is very annoying, but it also shows that even when you have the right regulation in place, because in the EU, I mean, many of us know that they are at the forefront, privacy protection, and so on and so forth. It's still very difficult to enforce the regulation. Why? Because we are talking about intangible assets. So data is intangible, we don't touch it, I mean, we can see it on a black screen, but sometimes, even when the right regulation is there, enforcement is very complicated. That also leads to the issue of competition policy. Even when we talk about competition policy, enforcement can be extremely difficult. Why? Because the traditional competition policy tools that we have for the non-digital economy are maybe not, you know, the best or fit for purpose in, you know, during the digital era. There are a lot of questions and maybe unsolved answers, but these are important issues perhaps to consider when thinking about these strategic issues. And very, very final point, we are doing a lot of analysis about innovation ecosystems in Asia, ASEAN, and actually even beyond. We look very much at how the digital transformation can enable from creation and more innovation in the economy. And what we could see is that, and I think this perhaps should also go into a framework for the digital economy for ASEAN, is the issue of lack of comparable data sometimes. I know, again, that it's not easy, that sometimes it takes time and effort to collect data, but this is perhaps something that the region could think about, you know, doing a little bit of investment, because it is so important and we need the right data to try to understand better what's going on to then be able to, in a sense, have more sophisticated type of policy making. And I'm sure that maybe some of you would like to react. Thank you.
Lili, you want to say something? No? Yeah. I think you mentioned something about the importance of regulations. I think this is a very always contentious issue, right? How much regulation do we need, right, to ensure that digital transformation is going to work? I think we also need to recognize here that for any digital transformation, I mean, these digital technologies, they have to work, right? So that at the end of the day, we have to make sure that what we're doing right now will really address the basic issue of whether they are good or good for the people, right? So that's why I think the issue of digital divide, although it's been often said, but I think this is something that we really need to look at. But I think my question here is, again, given that what we've seen so far in the region, right? ASEAN has implemented a lot. We have the e-commerce framework, you know, we have the Brunei digital transformation roadmap last year. We have the e-commerce agreement, and now last week we have the Boracay inclusive digital transformation. Given that what have been done so far in ASEAN, I'm trying to look at in terms of policy issues here, you know. Given that what ASEAN has done now, okay, what else is missing, you know? What are still the missing elements? What are still the gaps? And where do you think policies should be able to focus on? Because my point here is that we have to make sure that what we're doing right now will really contributing to something. Again, now within ASEAN economic community, we're not only talking about an integrated economic community. Now we're looking at a digitally integrated community, right? Even sustainable community. So maybe if we can at least just, I mean, I want to ask the speakers here, you know, if we can just identify, you know, very specific policies, you know, particularly in the immediate terms. Maybe given the experiences of China, for example, Brian, you know, what is really needed for ASEAN to make sure, even for individual countries like Indonesia, to make sure that digital transformation is not just something that is good on paper, but this is something that is going to work, right, for everyone. Yeah, maybe Brian can start.
Okay, again, I'm not familiar with the details of specific policies, but I can talk in terms of principle. I think there is always the risk in something like this where money chases the fastest returns, and it kind of soils the market because you're not focusing on the most valuable things to society. So I would argue that maybe one thing that government should do is focus policies in direct investment to areas that need it most. And that's first and foremost with the basic infrastructure of connectivity. And each government has different policies. Some are more state-led, some are more private sector-led. But I think there's a big risk that you leave these people out. Anyone that's not connected just through a basic internet connection is immediately part of that divide. I mean, they're just not being able to participate. And then when it goes to the kind of the venture side, I would say that incentivizing businesses to focus on certain sectors. And, you know, I understand e-commerce feels like it's overplayed, or maybe it's an area that's already gotten a lot of attention. But the power of e-commerce is that it brings prosperity to areas that don't have access to the mainstream economy. And so I think that's a very important driving force, because that's real economy implications as opposed to just digital entertainment, which is just passing time. And so thinking about how to take commerce from the urban areas to the rural areas, and then equipping the local community there with the tools they need. And when we talk about digital literacy, you have to upskill, but you also need to create technology that's accessible. So one of the reasons why WeChat became so popular in China is the voice command, the voice messages. You didn't have to write things, and those people who were less literate still had a very easy way to communicate. But there are also, when it comes to e-commerce, and you think about what now can be done with a mobile phone, you have farmers running e-commerce businesses from mobile phones, but it's about the usability and the lowering the barrier to entry, not upskilling every farmer to having, you know, coding skills, but really helping them to understand how to use the most basic tools. And I think that's what China did quite well. So you need to work both ways, upskilling and also downskilling, well, not downscaling, but opening up accessibility, because Monica talked about some statistics in terms of income for those who, you know, were the income improvements for those who are digitally connected and whatnot. And I think those are probably true. But one thing that I found was very interesting is in the rural areas, the entrepreneurs who used e-commerce had income that was equivalent to an urban you know, worker who had a college education but was not using e-commerce. So in a way, e-commerce levels the playing field for those with lower education, but they utilize the technology. So a question being, can you also create opportunities for those with less education, but they employ the technology, versus those who might have higher education but don't use the technology? Then you're going to see also, you know, some differences. So, I mean, that's my gut feeling. Yep.
Monica, I know you're very passionate about the idea of no one is left behind by this transformation. So maybe if you can further elaborate on your thoughts on this.
So I have not looked at, you know, the ASEAN e-commerce agreement or the I guess other digital related agreements, but my guess is that like some other ASEAN agreements, there needs to be like better enforcement and better compliance, right? To make it effective. So I think we need to look at, you know, what are some of the existing agreements that could be like enforced, right? And it's very hard to choose, you know, what the ASEAN DIFA should be focusing on, but clearly there are like some regulation that are like long overdue, like for example, data protection policies, right, and cybersecurities. So I'm just going to like basically structure my thoughts into 3 different pillars that I already discussed. The first one is on, trusted digital market. I think standards on data stewardship will be one big breakthrough for ASEAN if we can agree to some standards on data stewardship, right? Data stewardship means like data governance, data management, data privacy, right? And then on the second pillar, in terms of inclusive digital society, as Brian already mentioned, I think it's not only that digital transformation is competing with regulations, but also humans are competing with technologies, right? So, I mean, if we are to win over like technologies, then we need to invest in human capital. So I would like emphasize on, again, like inclusive educational policies. I mean, the thing about China, and I think one of the key that enables China to transform and to leapfrog is that China has a very strong education and health standards, right? And this is not the case in some of ASEAN countries. So the nuts and bolts of policies, education policies, inclusive education still needed. But now we need to catch up also with emerging technologies. So certified trainings, micro-credentials, and how firms go to schools, right? So like, people, practitioners actually teach at school. So these kind of things, lifelong learning, how to make, learning fun so that, people want to continuously learn, upskilling, reskilling. And then on the third pillars on more digitalized government, and this is key, I think, to public and private service provisions is digital ID. And I think if we can help, countries in ASEAN who are lagging behind in terms of their digital ID systems, then we can provide, capacity buildings. I was very enlightened to hear the signing between Singapore and India in terms of linking their Singapore's Pay Now is basically the e-payment in Singapore, and India's UPI, the unified something, basically their main digital ID. So now with my Singapore's bank account, I can make transactions to friends or colleagues or organization in India through my mobile phone. That's one big breakthrough. It was signed by Singapore's Monetary Authority Systems and India's UPI. It was attended by Singapore's Prime Minister and Modi. So it was a big breakthrough. So this is something that I feel, the importance of digital ID. Yeah.
Yes, Pak. I agree with Brian that we need to, before we involve in any digital economy framework, that we have to have upskilling, not only for example, the MSMEs, but also for the common citizens of Indonesia. That's why digital skill is become one of the priority of the ministry effort related to digital transformations. We also agree about the connectivity. In Indonesia, we have two kind of way on how to we connect the people, led by business and led by the government. In the area where the business see is not economically benefit for them, the government will take care of this connectivity infrastructure. and based on our government funding and also from the operators funding that you usual fund. So those two is very critical for every country before we have negotiation related to the digital economy. And related to the what Ibu Monica said, that related to the I forgot digital ID. This is also the one of the issue that in the this year digital economy working group in India. India presidency in the G20. Digital identity is one of the main issues. They call it digital public infrastructure, which is digital identity is one of the main factor in the DPI. So Indonesia's view on the DPI is we already did something related to which is also one of the elements on the DPI, but we believe that in every country there are different policy regarding this. For example, digital identity. Like Ibu Monica said that India and Singapore have their agreement related to you can use your handphone to pay everything, because that's also India state India presentation during the last week working group meeting, that they very advanced in digital public infrastructure. They can use their own handphone to pay everything. They don't need to go to their bank account, to their bank application, because in Indonesia we have BCA, they have their own application. BNI, they have own application, but in India they don't need to go to the every bank application, but they have one application that connected to all. But I think that's the problem. Not every country have the same condition like India or like Singapore. We can in Indonesia, for example, I don't think we can make all the banks use one application like in India. That's the challenge, and I think
That's a good question.
Yes.
You don't think that Indonesia could create equivalent to UPI? It's a payment rail system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But we have queries and things like that, but I don't think right now we can call it like digital public infrastructure, like defined by India, because we have other policy related to, for example, one single identity. We have a regulation related to digital identity, but it's a bit different with other country. And I think other countries also have differences with India policy regarding this digital public infrastructure. But Chris is one of the things that can multi-platform. But I don't think it will be the same like in India case. Not yet, yeah, because it's India have power to say to all the economy use this, but Indonesia different policy. We cannot say, hey, everybody use this one. We cannot have that kind of policy.
If I may, just a small story for Singapore. Also, when it first started out its payment systems, each bank had its own pay app. So the banks had to talk to one another and make it interoperable so that we can now transfer to each other easily. So I think also working with the relevant institutions, so the banks themselves had to agree, we don't want people to be on separate systems. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we still have 10 more minutes for the last question. I know and I understand that Ibu, you have a question to ask. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Relo. I'm a quite passionate person, so thank you for giving me an extra time. So I don't know whether, because my question is almost quite the same with what has been explained by Pak Ikhwan and then also Dr. Relo. So from today, we knew that ASEAN, in terms of DEVA, already published so many papers, commitment reports, and so on. But the main problem, the main important thing is how to operationalize all the strategy written on those report and commitment. That I think that is the most important thing. And then in that sense, to tackle those issues, Brian and Jessica already provide us an alternative by involving the private sector into the business. But however, Jessica and Brian, I think each ASEAN country has their own different problem, because maybe Indonesia, to attract the private sector into these businesses is not as easy as it seems happen in the Singapore, because Pak Ikhwan said that the business sector or private sector have not seen the profits to jump into this business. That's why it's very difficult to have like cooperation and involvement between the government and the private sector. That's the different things that we should keep in our mind. And second, also about the study of DEVA, Pak Ikhwan mentioned that on the phase 1 of the study, is the objective is one to, identify the gaps between the countries, between the ASEAN, about the gap and where each country stand. I think about that issue, Ibu Monica already answered the question by her very comprehensive presentation, because Ibu Monica already, explain most of the study. I think for the study in DEVA about assessing the gaps, ASEAN Secretariat could follow the previous study and then maybe update some data, because on the Ibu Monica presentation, the data is quite old. I think about 2006. So I think in terms of phase 1 is quite feasible to do. I don't know, maybe I'm quite a pragmatist person. And then the third is, I know that digital economy is having a quite broad range, but I want to be specific on the digital trade, on the e-commerce. And then beside the law of the data protection, I also agree with Ibu Lili in her opening remark. Ibu Lili mentioned about the importance of the law of competition. As we know, in Indonesia, there are only view of a marketplace running in this country, and because of that, I'm afraid that it will lead to the oligopoly market, right? Because only few people who is jump into the business, and because of that, I'm afraid that to attract more customer, they will doing a price war for each other. For me as a customer, I always compare the price on this certain marketplace and compare it to the other, and because of that, the marketplace will have a power to pressure or to do to push the merchant to give a lower price. That is why we need to I agree with Ibu Lili about the importance of the law of competition. So in this issue, I would like to ask to Brian, as a former president of Alibaba, former vice president of Alibaba, how to tackle the issue to maintain a fair trade in the e-commerce, and how the government should address that issue to protect the merchant and especially the SMEs. Thank you. That will be my question.
Okay. I think competition is very important in this space because it keeps the companies accountable. So I actually support policies that maintain or encourage competition, which means that, when companies become too big, governments should also think about how to manage that. I think the most important principle is what they call contestability. Is the space still viable for new entrants to come in? And that is a subjective assessment, but I have always thought that e-commerce is a dynamic space where there are always new entrants entering. Look what's happening in China. Everyone thought that Alibaba was the dominant player, but then you have JD, but you have Pinduoduo, and now you have Kuaishou, and you have Douyin. These companies are new entrants that are using different methods like video to do e-commerce, and they're growing much faster than Alibaba. So do you need a heavy hand to dismantle and break up a company when it becomes too big, or do you let the market forces play a role? But I think things like monopolistic practices where you have preconditions and you force merchants to only use your platform, or you don't allow for sharing of data, are detrimental to competition. So then at a minimum, government should say you can't block consumers from using your payment system on other e-commerce platforms, or you shouldn't block the access to information from consumers coming from competitor sites. I mean, those are more nuanced ways of ensuring that competition is thriving, because the market will determine who is the best player. And if a marketplace doesn't address the needs of a consumer to the satisfaction of the consumer, then they're going to go to the competition, right? So that would be my hope. But I mean, what we're facing today now in Southeast Asia potentially is growing dominant players who have economic clout and can maybe suppress the emergence of new players. And maybe domestically, government should handle it the way they need to, but then ASEAN-wise, I think there's definitely going to be a challenge where you have a large market like Indonesia and strong players coming out of here, and then how do they compete in neighboring markets, and what are the rights and privileges of these outside players playing in these neighboring markets is going to be a question you have to address. China didn't have to do that because it's a unified market. But if you have an Indonesian player going into Vietnam, how is Vietnam going to respond to that? They all won national champions, I imagine. But then you have to think about economies of scale, and you have to think about all these different considerations. Balancing what's good for ASEAN versus what's good for the individual countries is going to be a critical question.
If I can quickly add on that, and I'm not at all suggesting that ASEAN should go in this direction, but it's just to give you an idea of the level of the debate in other regions in the world. Both at EU level and in North America, there are some legal competition experts that they believe that in the case of big technological giants, the burden of the proof should be reversed, because it is so difficult to actually monitor what they're doing. In some cases, there were cases about anti-competitive behavior, that is the platform allowing MSMEs to sell and trade. They were getting the data about the MSMEs themselves, and then they were competing against it when they were selling their own products. So it's difficult to understand what's going on when you don't have access to this data. And so some scholars are proposing, okay, the burden of the proof should be reversed. So these companies should actually demonstrate that they're not doing it, and it's not up to me to demonstrate that they are doing it. It's very tricky. I mean, it's very sensitive. But that's the level of the debate, because there's an acknowledgement of the fact that sometimes you suspect that there is anti-competitive behavior, but it's very difficult to prove it.
Okay, I think we've almost reached the time here. You want to say something, Lili, first? Yeah, okay. I just want to, again, thank everyone for a very good discussion. I think maybe I don't intend to summarize everything, but I think there's a lot of ideas to digest here, but maybe just make a small reference to what Brian mentioned about market contestability. Okay, I think at the end of the day, I mean, the private sector will be there, to promote digital transformation. And as policymakers, I think, particularly from the trade side, right? I think the ability to implement policies, for example, that would eliminate trade barriers will be critical, because ASEAN should be able to integrate with the global economy. I think that kind of integration is critical, the way I see it, to facilitate more information sharing, right? Whether in terms of innovation or digital technological diffusion, also in terms of how investments can be made more forthcoming, right? I think I'm always biased about investment, because FDI, I think, is very important in terms of presenting new ideas, okay? I think if we want ASEAN to become the powerhouse, right, for innovation, right, then it has to be, it has to follow that all countries should be more willing to accept, to open ourselves, of course, with some limitation, given some safeguards. But at the end of the day, I think policymakers have a lot to do. But of course, they don't have the full responsibility. I always think that any digital transformation is a joint responsibility by everyone, right? But it's just a matter of balancing the different roles and ensuring that this DEFA, or this digital transformation for ASEAN, is not, again, as I mentioned, not only something that is good on paper, but it's something that's going to work. There's also a reference earlier about implementation. For me, this is critical. At the end of the day, no matter what ASEAN is doing or what other ASEAN member states are doing when it comes to digital transformation, the bottom line is whether things are being implemented effectively, right? Because without that critical element of effective implementation, I don't think things are going to make any good results. I think with those words, thank you so much again to our excellent speakers, Brian, Monica, Paikman, Jessica, and Ha. And I'm really looking forward for another engagement like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Paladin. I do not mean to conclude, even though I will. That's the power of having monopoly microphone on. So if I may conclude, there are 3 points from our discussions. I'm gonna make it very concise. Appropriate technology and digital innovations. Make it as human-centric technology and digital innovations. The second one, governance and regulations. Work on data, cybersecurity, privacy data, cybersecurity and competitions, governance and regulations. The third, facilitations, I should put it, the third, inclusive digital innovations. Provide facilitations and supports to closing digital divide, infrastructure, access, skills. So, and on the ASEAN Digital Economic Framework, I think the government of Indonesia, supported by all ASEAN countries, agreed to have ASEAN Digital Economic Framework, DEFA, as one of the deliverables of Indonesia chairmanship this year. And to provide what would be the contents of DEFA, I agree with Pak Ihwan. Let's come up with the proposals, certain pillars that should be included in the chapters, and then put in the appendix review of the existing Boracay digital declarations, Brunei Digital Economic Framework, and ASEAN's digital work plans. And also we can put some of other comparisons or review, such as the digital economic agreement that Singapore, Chile, and Australia have been signed, as well as other ASEAN have been involved as a member of digital or e-commerce agreements. So I think on behalf of the Minister of Trade, Pak Kasan is called by the Minister, on behalf of the Minister of Trade of Indonesia, Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, and ITAPS IPB Bogor, we would like to thank you so much for spending your valuable insights and time with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rillo, for bringing us to an insightful session today, and Ibu Lili for the conclusion. Please everyone give a round of applause again to our moderator and speakers. Now we've come to the end of this event. On behalf of the organizing committees, we will for active participation and contribution today. Please apologize if there were mistakes throughout the event.